Hi, my name is Delmer Sib. I am a history lecturer at the University of Belize and also an active cultural activist as it relates to the Yucatec Maya identity, particularly in Western Belize. Today I'm going to be talking about a decline of the Yucatec Maya population in Belize. Primarily, the topic relates to looking at the census data and trying to examine what causes or what factors led to the decline of people identifying as Yucatec Maya of Belize. It is worth noting that our experiences in Belize are very different in different places as to how is it that people are using the terminologies to identify as Yucatec Maya and what certain expressions, cultural expressions, languages, and so on they use to connect to a particular group. It is also worth noting that the label of Yucatec Maya was a terminology that was adopted in the 2000s, and there are still people in different communities that are identifying as Santa Cruz or Icaiche or the Cocoms groups that were within the Yucatan region. I'm going to be going deeper into this discussion as we go along, but I wanted to start today's discussion with looking at this particular image. Some time ago, a group called Another Beautiful Day in San Antonio, of which I am part of, held a retreat. This retreat included youths, middle-aged persons, and also elders. And part of the discussion that we had was that we are understanding or observing, I should say, that cultural traditions, people identifying as Yucatec Maya, and even the language had been waning in the communities for for a considerable time. It has been declining for so many years, and we realize that if we don't do something about it, it will disappear. So part of that discussion is what I'm going to be presenting today, looking at some of the factors that were discussed and identified as key elements that had been or have been contributing to the decline of people identifying as Yucatec Maya. So today I want to be focusing on three different aspects. I want to first of all look at the census data to understand what are some of the trends of the Yucatec Maya population in Belize. This particular analysis I think is very important so that we look at how the census is representing or how people are identifying, I should say, as Yucatec Maya over the years. It is important, as much as there are criticisms about the census data being inaccurate. I think that it provides a high level or an indication at least of where our population stand. In this case, it's important that we problematize it, that we understand what is it that is happening and where it is it that it is happening. Where are people not identifying as Yucatec Maya, and how is it that they're negotiating and understanding their identity? The second element of my discussion focuses on at least looking at two factors that influence the decline of the Yucatec Maya in Belize. This is primarily focused or based on, as I had mentioned prior, that retreat that occurred on the Another Beautiful Day committee's retreat. Some of these ideas was bounced off as to perhaps some of the causes and trends of what has been occurring in our communities. And the second aspect to it is that this also based on secondary literature review. I want to state that I am not going to be trying to explore every single factor that leads to the decline of the Yucatec Maya population in Belize. Rather, I will just explore it in a very general term so that we can have a level of orientation to it. And lastly, we're going to break down at least two efforts that help to promote Yucatec Maya identity in Belize. With the aim of this presentation is really, or the central aim of this presentation is really to explore, cause more discussion and debate perhaps on what is happening in the communities, Yucatec Maya communities in Belize, and for us to start to generate solutions to these issues because as we speak, the language is disappearing, different bodies of knowledge are disappearing, knowledge of herbs, knowledge of spirituality, knowledge of construction. All of these indigenous knowledge systems are disappearing if we don't make a conscious effort to rescue um, some of these knowledge systems, we are going to be losing it. And for me, it starts with being proud of being Yucatec Maya and being proud of sharing the knowledge, sharing the language, and sharing the pride and sharing the joy of being Yucatec Maya. Although we can have perhaps a more robust discussion on what it means to be Yucatec identity or to be Yucatec in Belize, I know that it's also a question that perhaps may have an answer or perhaps it may not have an answer, because what does it mean to be Yucatec Maya in the western part of Belize may be different from what it means to be Yucatec Maya in the northern part of Belize as opposed to people that live in Mexico and Yucatan. So I don't want to get into that particular discussion. And I do want to sort of state that I am very conscious that we cannot cast these homogeneous definitions of Yucatec or any identity perhaps, because it's important to note that some of these expressions, practices, and so on have been changing as it relates to historical times and also to sociological spaces. So even when we say we are Yucatec Maya, there are certain elements that are different for me as it relates to understanding myself as Yucatec as opposed to different other people. However, there is particularly an identification as Yucatec that we must consider and also explore within the context of Belize. Why Yucatec Maya? It is worth noting that the terminology Yucatec Maya is actually a term that was used in the census in the year 2000. It's something sort of that sprung about after consulting people about how they would like to be included within the census, that they began to use the term Yucatec. However, it is worth noting that there were different groups that inhabited the area. You have the Ikaiche. In fact, even up to today, you have some people in northern Belize who would say, I am Ikaiche Maya, I am Santa Cruz Maya, and they would hold on to that particular identity. Others in the West would say that they're Itza Maya. However, now they are sort of used, the statement that is used to identify them is Yucatec Maya. And primarily this is used because of the area where they originated and where they basically were forced to migrate from. The Yucatec Maya originated in the Yucatan Peninsula in what is present-day Mexico as a result of the Caste War, which started in 1847. When the war exploded, when the confrontation started, different groups of people were seeking refuge in different areas in Central America. And you have, of course, them migrating to the northern parts of Belize, Corozal, Orinjuak, and also to the west. So you have areas like Benque, San Jose Socots, San Antonio, Bully Tree, Cristo Rey, having groups that originated in the Yucatan area. What is worth noting, though, is that particularly for the case of San Antonio and some villages in the northern parts of Belize, they identify themselves as Maya Masewal. Maya Masewal is basically a term that is used to refer to peasants. It has Nawa origin, but it was adopted by the Yucatec Maya to mean us. And this particularly was a terminology that was adopted to question and to challenge, but not only challenge, but reject the terminology of Indian, right? They did not want to be called Indian. As a result of that, they adopted the terminology Maya Masewal. So, as we speak, there are a number of Yucatec Maya who seek to be associated with Masewal rather than any other terminology around. The oral accounts documented by Mr. Alfonso Zul in his history of San Antonio basically indicate that leaders within Maya communities in Yucatan identified able men and put them in charge of small groups and sent them to leave the war zone. One of the reasons for this was so that they could safeguard the lineage of the Maya in the region. Obviously, the war affair was occurring. There was an attempt to basically erase some of the Maya population in the Yucatan region. As a result of that, this was a strategy that they used for survival. In fact, Alfonso Zul shares in his book that the Masewals of San Antonio related the experiences to their children in tears. And this book was published in the 90s, in the 90s. And what you notice here is that the stories were being passed on from one generation to the other. people that he interviewed were obviously remembering that story of the Kaswa, remembering the experiences of their ancestors or their grandparents or even parents. Yet, what occurred? Now, if you speak in the community of San Antonio about the Kaswa, you would not get a lot of responses to it because there's limited orientation to it. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why we have such a low number of people identifying as Yucatec Maya. But what you see here is that that aspect of oral history, sharing a story, was an important aspect that has been being lost over the years. Before I get into the census data, I want to highlight that the state, and when I mean the state in this case, we are referring to both the colonial and post-colonial terminologies used to refer to different groups. In this case, by 1861, the Maya populations of Belize were grouped into Indians. Eventually, by 1946, you notice that the census data catalogs them as American Indians. By 1970, Amerindians. By 1970, you also notice that you have the arrival or rise of usage of Maya and Kekchi. Now, what is important to note here is that Maya in this case was grouping basically everyone else that was not Quechua. So even today, you notice that some people some Mopan Maya would say, well, I am Maya, not say Mopan Maya. So these are some of the intricacies that occur whenever you speak to some people. Then by 1991, you notice that the census data puts terminologies such as Mopan Maya, Quechua Maya, and other Mayas. So these terminologies again are being used in the census data to refer to the different groups of Maya people in Belize. And it is not until 2000 that you have the three different groups that we have today, right? The Mopan, Kekche, and Yucatec. I know the spelling for Kekche may be different here, but this is how it appears in the census data. So what you see here is that as of 2000, you have that category being Yucatec in Belize. And when you look at the census data of 1991 and 2000, you notice that you have 1991 in particular, if you look at it, you notice that you have Maya Kekchi, Maya Mopan, and Maya Other. Right? So this is grouping everybody else together. The numbers here indicate, at least for the Maya Ada, which we are presuming the Yucatec Maya were part of, including 5,686. Of course, this may include other groups that were present in Belize. By 2000, you have the origin or the first usage of the terminology Yucatec Maya. In this case, Yucatec Maya is used, and you see that 3,155 persons identify themselves as Yucatec Maya. In this case, it represented 1.4% of the population. So what you see occurring here is that you have 3,155, and I want us to keep that number in mind because this was the first time when the term Yucatec was being used. By 2010, you notice that Yucatec Maya, you only have 2,869 individuals identifying themselves as Yucatec Maya. Predominantly, you will notice that the dominant districts where the Yucatec Maya are located or were located in 2010 are the Cayo district with 1,699 and the Corozal district with 590. Orange Walk, actually Belize, the Belize district comes third with 279, and Orange Walk would come fourth with 226. And to a lesser extent, you have Toledo and the Stand Creek districts. But what you see here is that instead of increasing, you notice that there is a decline in people identifying as Yucatec Maya. In this case, this is obviously something that something is affecting it because most of the groups are increasing their numbers Obviously, you have people getting married and so on. And perhaps one of the reasons is that people are intermarrying and their children are also not identifying as Yucatec, they're identifying as another group. So those are factors that perhaps we should be exploring at a future point. By 2022, it is worth noting that you see that 2,160 persons identified as Yucatec Maya in Belize. Of that number, predominantly the Yucatec Maya continue to be in the Cayo district. You see that Corozal continues to be the second dominant area, and Orinduac, which significantly declined, continue to be the third area where, well, actually, the Orinduac overtook Belize district to become the third, but still with a lower number. So what you see happening here is that the population is declining and something is happening. Uh, in addition to that, another indicator that we must explore is the languages or people that are able to speak the language. In fact, some people would use the language as a meter of identity. So if you could speak the language, then you are a Yucatec Maya. If you can't, then perhaps you're not. Some people would do that. But even so, you notice that only 1,822 speakers of Yucatec Maya are left in Belize. Of that, you also see a concentration in the Cayo district. You also see that Corozal continues to be the second dominant area as it relates to people that are able to speak the Yucatec Maya language. One of the explanations as it relates to the decline of the Maya in Belize or Yucatec Maya in Belize is that of globalization. Obviously, you have different languages that are becoming way more dominant. So you have English, for example, the language that I am using to make this presentation, Spanish, who are considered to be more useful, quote unquote, more useful, are dominating in many communities and their influence goes beyond just formal education, but also within different households. So some parents are choosing um, to train their children to perform better in school, to know English from very, very early. And part of that also means that they sacrifice the Yucatec Maya language in that process. So that's one of the elements that we need to look at. You also have the influence of global media. Obviously, the world it's changing. You have a dominance of Western media as well, and that is influencing a lot of our people to shift away from traditional practices. In addition to that, you also have assimilation and integration that is happening. And part of that is also influencing the loss of traditional knowledge and the loss of language. So in many communities, for example, you will note that elders are not passing on the language for several reasons to the younger generation. But it's also worth noting that indigenous groups are not just dormant agents receiving globalization. Different groups have been adapting in different ways to um, perhaps adopt some aspects of globalization to teach the culture, teach the language. For example, you have a Facebook page, the Belize Yucatec Maya, that is run by Andy Chuk, that uses technology, uses some modern tools to see how the Yucatec Maya culture is shared. In addition to that, as I had started off my presentation with, culture has been evolving. So obviously you have certain groups adopting certain practices and making it theirs for them to explore and see how they could safeguard the identity, language, and culture. There is also a deeper quest. In fact, when the census data was shared, and it came very blatant that the Yucatec Maya population is declining. One of the users of Facebook posted this data, and what you notice there is that the response that you saw on Facebook by mixed groups, right? You have some elders, you have some youths commenting about what is the potential issue for it. One of the central themes that I noted is that many pointed at the idea that many of the Yucatec Maya are identifying as mestizo. One of the things here to note is that um, you see that that terminology is used, the term mestizo, to the mixture of two groups. And whenever people are intermarrying, the new terminology used for them would be mestizo. That at least that's the assumption that is being made in some of these commentaries that I saw. But of course, it sort of also pointed to the whole idea of being ashamed of being Yucatec Maya, the whole idea of mixtures that are occurring, and also a potential other factor would be the migration of people. But in this case, one of the other ideas that came about was that there was or there is miseducation in Belize, and that's perhaps a concept that we could explore further on. But for the purposes of our discussion, it's important to note that this whole idea of identifying as mestizo as opposed to Yucatec Maya is an issue that is growing in the communities, and there has to be a way of addressing what really determines each of these groups and how we should be negotiating. Now, I am not saying that identifying as mestizo is a bad thing, right? But I do think that we need to explore what is happening as it relates to people identifying as mestizo as opposed to Yucatec Maya. Um, One of the other factors that I think came very strong within the discussions that we had and also comes within the literature is that the colonial education system left legacies that also prompted uh, perhaps a very late awakening of identification and indigenous rights per se. In this case, you notice that the colonial project was very, very much focused on educating people for particular posts, not necessarily for an orientation towards Belize as a first thing, and of course, as an orientation towards identity and knowing yourself and traditions and so forth. So the church state system also has something to do with this, where for some churches, they closed their door to some aspects of Yucatec Maya traditions. And obviously, it was not until the 70s that you have an awakening of a Belizeanization of the curriculum. But even this Belizeanization had only small aspects of connecting to the Maya heritage and African heritage in Belize. This is an ongoing process of decolonization that continues to happen in Belize. But what you see here is that some of these colonial narratives, Western ideas that basically discredit Yucatec Maya identity and demonize some of the practices are aspects that continue to linger around in our communities. So how do we address them? As I had mentioned, I am involved in another beautiful day in San Antonio committee in the village of San Antonio, Cayo. And one of the discussions that is very important to have is how do we address the issues or our deficiencies? The Another Beautiful Day in San Antonio committee is basically a grassroots organization that is looking at promoting the culture in different ways through games, through linguistic competitions, through promoting history, through highlighting the community spirit and community ambience. So these are perhaps strategies that we must be engaging to see how we develop a deeper connection. Part of this discussion also must include a connection to the archaeological sites that are within our communities. People need to understand and connect to their heritage as well as understand the different aspects of the Yucatec Maya identity both in Belize and in other regions. It's also worth noting that the Another Beautiful Day in San Antonio committee provides various opportunities for people of the community and beyond. But the central idea here is to promote that pride for being a Yucatec Maya and promote and encourage the youth in particular to figure out a way of connecting to their Maya roots. Part of this entails also looking at digital tools, looking at campaigns that include not only community activities but on social platforms, creating videos and so on to educate and also share the knowledge. So this is a picture, and the whole idea is again we come back to the retreat. How do we build community? Um, and here is also a picture of a public speaking competition that occurred and part of that public speaking competition enhanced the students, primarily primary school students, to talk the language and share some words in Yucatec Maya to promote the identity and to, as you can see there, share the pride in me, Yucatec Maya. So this basically concludes my presentation. I know that perhaps due to time, I need to conclude. And also, I would like to leave you with the whole notion that, something is happening in our communities. We need to first accept that the decline is happening. And second, we need to act on it. If you are of any group, of any ethnicity, and, if you want to work to revive culture, I encourage you to do so. It is very needed. We are looking at the root lines of our country. Thank you.